Hello, NDC Porto. Have you had a good week? I've had a great time. I have loved this. So yeah, just before I crack on with whatever this is, there is a huge amount of work that goes into making this happen so we can all just turn up for a few days, eat food, drinks, and watch talks and meet each other and talk and everything. So first of all the support staff who have been working in this venue, bringing the food out, sorting the sound out and the microphones, making my laptop work with their HDMI systems and everything else. They've just been working solidly the entire week. So huge round of applause for all of them. And a round of applause for all the speakers who've put in the time to make these amazing talks and learn this stuff and then decide to share it with you and come out here. So big round of applause for all the speakers. And then, yeah, the NDC team, Kirsty and Jacob and Henriette and Emily and Alan, and I will forget names, but they're all wonderful. They're amazing people, Magnus and the photographers and everything. So big, huge round of applause, maybe some cheering for the NDC crew. And then give yourselves a round of applause for coming along to the conference, because if you didn't do that, then none of the rest of it would happen. And so, yeah, I appreciate you coming out so that I get to do this stuff. So, round of applause for yourselves. So this is the Albatross project. Hands up, yell out if you've read the Phoenix project. Yeah, so this is the opposite of that. And actually it started out as a talk, but then I decided I was bored with doing talks, and so I've turned it into a one-person play. And in order to do this effectively, I have trained with the best, because this is an important talk. This is a talk about change and driving change within your organization. And it's a talk about ideas and the importance of ideas and sharing ideas and nurturing ideas and helping them to grow. But more than any of that, this is really a talk about meetings. And so, yes, that sounds awful, so I'm going to turn it into a play instead. Because, the meetings. Because we have lots of meetings. We have the meeting to decide we need to have a meeting. And then we have the meeting to decide when to have the meeting that we decided to have in the previous meeting. Once we've come up with a time to have the meeting, obviously we need the pre-meeting meeting. Has anyone ever been to a pre-meeting meeting? Yeah, that is a thing that has actually happened a non-zero number of times. But now you have the pre-meeting meeting, so you can work out how to get the outcome you want from the meeting rather than finding out what the outcome will be. Then you have the meeting post-mortem meeting, where you try to work out why, despite having the pre-meeting meeting, you didn't get the meeting outcome from the meeting that you wanted, so you have that meeting to figure that out. Then you have the bigger meeting summarizing the meeting for the people who weren't at the meeting. And then somebody says, should we have a meeting to discuss whether we're having enough meetings? So you have that meeting, and you then have to have an all-hands meeting to announce that no, we're not having enough meetings, and the number of meetings will continue until morale improves. So yeah, we're going to do this as a play. And I don't do things by halves. And everybody knows that the best living actor in the world at the moment is Andy Serkis. And so I decided I was going to take acting lessons from Andy Serkis and learn how to just, without the use of any props or any costume or anything else like that, just slowly turn myself into a character and inhabit that character. He wasn't available, and so what I'm going to do instead is, when I've got the glasses on, I'm this dude, and when I take the glasses off, I'm me. Okay? People at the back, just try and guess when I've got the glasses on, or come down the front. It's either way, up to you. Okay. This is Steve, by the way. Everyone is Steve unless I actually know their name. I think I have a Raspberry Pi at home whose host name is Steve. I don't know why, I just really like it. So yes. Okay. The scene, Steve's retirement party. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my retirement party. It's been a long career and a fruitful career, and I'm very proud of the things that I have achieved and of the teams and those of you that I have worked with. And I wanted to take this opportunity just to reflect on everything that I have achieved over the last 40 years here at Innitrode, and maybe offer some advice to Susan, who will be taking over as my successor and will continue to drive the kind of innovation and achievement that we have over my time with the company. I started my management career here in 1994, and it was a simpler time when some of this overlaps with the simple talk. This is kind of the dramatized version to draw more people in, okay? But yeah, it's kind of like, I need a picture. It's the same slides. It was a simpler time when this was what the computer looked like on everybody's desk, and there was none of this mouse and graphics and different colors and everything, and we just built simple systems that got the job done. And we used Infomix 4GL to build a system which had very, very simple screen design. This was how you designed a screen. This was how you link the fields to columns in tables and databases. And this was how you did a query against that code. And it was a simpler time. We didn't have to worry about GUIs or event-driven applications. Everything was running just in a single process. And we managed this project using the state-of-the-art project management at the time, SSADM 3.0, the structured system analysis and design methodology. And essentially the way this works is you have an information gathering stage where you work with the stakeholders, and then you have business analysts who work out how to translate that into a distinct and reproducible set of processes. And then you have the technical analysts who then generate the specification for the program, which takes the form of pseudocode. And then you have the developers who make a few simple changes to that pseudocode so it will compile. So yes, and with that, we delivered this software successfully, on time, under budget. And because of my work on that project, I was promoted to junior vice president in charge of all the software peoples, where I was able to finally make a difference to the way that Innitrode handled its development activities. And so we were just about to give this new system that we had built for the logistics department, we were about to hand it over to them and go into maintenance mode and just keep that software running forever and ever and ever. But then, Microsoft launched Windows 95, and Infomix 4GL didn't run on Windows 95. And obviously, we need to make sure that our software is future-proof. We have to be able to support this into 10, 15 years into the future. And so we decided that we would have to put the logistics project on hold while we investigated this new technology. And we decided that this needed a meeting. So we had a meeting to look at all the available ways of building software in this new paradigm of the graphical user interface and windows and mice and icons and things. And it turned out that we had to create a two-tier architecture. So with the Unix system, the database and the application are both running on the same Unix box, and there is no need for communication. But in this new world, we need a two-tier architecture known as client-server, where we create an application that runs on all the PCs in the office, and then they all talk to the same database server. And we use transactions and locking to make sure that no bad updates ever happen, ever. And so we decided to build this. And I made the decision personally to adopt what I thought was the most technically advanced and future-proof of the available programming languages at the time, and I chose Gupta SQL Windows, which was a head and shoulders above all the other development tools at the time. We looked at Visual Basic, we looked at Visual C++. We thought, no, Gupta SQL Windows will go the distance. This is a real thing. I really used this. That is its editor. That is a collapsible list box, which is also the editor for this programming language. And so it's like significant white space, but in a tree view. And my favorite thing about this is that the source code was saved in a .app file, and it was binary. And then you have to do source control with a binary blob, where the change, it was a real thing. It's not around anymore, funny that. Hooray. And because this was a graphical user interface, and because it was a new way of writing software, it was a new paradigm, and so we needed a new approach to project management. We needed a revolutionary new way to handle the needs and requirements of this project. So we went with SSADM 4.0, which was the same as SSADM 3.0, except the pseudocode that the technical analysts wrote for the developers was object-oriented. I don't know what the difference was really, but that wasn't it. Probably, I mean, it might have been. Who knows? And to manage this project, we used Microsoft Project for Windows 95, which let us plan everything down to the hour within a day, including the development and the QA processes and the ops processes and the meetings and the holidays and the sickness and the death and the acts of God. All of this was planned down to the last half an hour, and I would like to just take a moment and reflect on our lost colleague, Fred, and just express my gratitude to him for dying precisely on schedule. Yes, Microsoft Project. Obviously, the logistics department need to be able to manage their data while we are doing this, but Microsoft had just released Excel for Windows 95, the most advanced spreadsheet mankind had ever seen. And so we gave the logistics department Excel and a book on VBA, and we said, you use this, and then in a year or so, we'll come back, we will have your new software. And so that's what they did. And so by 1999, we had written all the system analysis, we'd written the business analysis, we'd written the technical analysis, we had the object-oriented pseudocode, and we were ready to start development on this new cross-platform, client-server, graphical user interface system. But then, we noticed the internet. Now, obviously, the internet only appeared in 1999, so we were right on the cutting edge of technology here. We were never sure why this was called Internet Explorer 5, why they started at version 5, but there it was. That's what they did. And so we thought, well, we're not 100% sure that this internet thing is going to take off. The dot-com bubble had burst, and so we had to hedge our bets, but we decided we should, in parallel, develop a web version of the logistics department's application for all those members of the logistics department who work in other places. And so we decided we would build this with active server pages, Microsoft's technology for building dynamic web applications. But we had a problem. All the programmers are busy building the Gupta SQL Windows system. So, solution? We have a meeting to discuss this problem, and I'm very proud that I was the one who offered the ultimate solution. I was also the one who chose the solution out of those that were offered, but I promise I wasn't biased. And the solution was use someone else's programmers. This was called outsourcing. And given the power of the internet, we could, instead of paying our own programmers minimum wage to come into our office where we had to feed them and keep the heating on, we could instead use other people's programmers in countries that we had never been to and probably would never have to go to, where we would never have to look any of those people in the eye. And so we wrote up our specifications and our requirements, and we sent it over to the outsourcing people. And if you've never tried outsourcing, I highly recommend it. This is how outsourcing works. You send the company a detailed design document and specification, and then you wait 18 months, and then they send you back a backup of a SQL database with stored procedures that produce raw HTML that you just pipe through classic ASP. I'm not making that up. I can't remember if it took 18 months, but that was what they sent back. No tests, no anything. And yeah, it generated, they had a table with the CSS in it. That's what they did. So in 2004, we have the Gupta SQL Windows application. We have the classic ASP wrapper around a SQL Server database application. And we are finally ready to start the testing phase with both of these. But then, service-oriented architecture. This was the new hotness in 2004. And if there's one thing that I have tried to maintain during my term as the junior vice president in charge of the software peoples here at Innitrode, it's to stay on that cutting edge. It's to always be moving forward and looking to the future. And so, of course, we had to adopt service-oriented architecture because this would make our application even more future-proof than the client server, because this had 3 tiers. So instead of the computers, the desktop PCs, writing the SQL and running it against the database, they created a request and sent it to an application server, which generated the SQL and then sent it to the database, and then that came back, and then it sent it back to the desktop. And clearly, this is better because service-oriented architecture. There are many ways of doing this, but we chose to go with SOAP, the Simple Object Access Protocol. Simple. Simple. The stuff in black is the data. Simple Object Access Protocol. But SOAP was very complicated, and there were WSDL files, the web service definition language that you had to create, and this was the contract, and it was very, very tricky to keep your WSDL files and your XML schema and everything in line, and so we looked at the Java way of doing this, but then we had a meeting, and we decided that the best approach for us was to go all Microsoft all the way, so we would rewrite the application in Microsoft.NET, which was a brand new cross-platform. No, it wasn't cross-platform. It was a brand new, highly performant. No, it wasn't highly performant. It was new, though. We would rewrite the application in .NET. We would have a WPF client, Windows Presentation Foundation, completely future-proof. Microsoft will never abandon this. WCF services, which completely abstracted the SOAP and the wire protocol and everything away from the actual business logic code, and you could make it appear as a SOAP service or a NetTCP service simply by changing 800 lines of XML configuration. And we used WF Workflow, which was originally called WWF Workflow, and caused a flurry of lawsuits, which not only ended with Microsoft having to change it to just WF Workflow, but also with the American wrestling people having to change their name to WWE because the World Wildlife Foundation had noticed them too as part of that series of lawsuits. I love that. What do they call Worldwide Wrestling Entertainment now, or WWE? You're American, you're supposed to know this stuff. Sorry? Okay. So we decided that we would rewrite everything to these new standards, and our estimated launch date was 2008. Meanwhile, the logistics department were steaming ahead with their Excel spreadsheet. It was wonderful. It did everything they needed it to do. And so this was our new marker for where the software had to get to and the complexity it needed to be able to handle. So in 2009, we have the code ready. The code is complete. We're ready to start testing. It's being handed over to the QA department. Sorry again. But then, a new kind of application came along. Rich internet applications, because Adobe had created an animation system called Flash. And at first, Flash was just used for making pretty buttons, but then people started to use Flash to make games. And many of our developers were using Flash to make games in their spare time. And so we started to think, well, maybe this kind of browser plugin technology could be used to build line of business applications. And so we had a meeting to discuss whether this was the way we wanted to go. And we thought about writing actual business applications in Adobe Flash, but that seemed wrong because Adobe are an art company and Flash was for games and spinny buttons and everything, and we weren't sure that it was going to go in the right direction. We wanted this solution to be future-proof. If there's one word that I have used as my watchword throughout my career, it is future-proof. Everything must always be future-proof. And so we went with Silverlight. Such an easy joke. Poor Silverlight. And this was a new paradigm. Internet applications, connected internet applications, accessible from phones and iPads and tablets all over the world. And this new paradigm required a new approach. And at around this time, there was a manifesto that appeared online. And this manifesto was signed off on by some of the greatest software engineers who have ever worked in a room together. And they had created working systems in record time with minimal churn and distinctly under budget, using this set of techniques that they called extreme programming. And they said, we value interactions, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. That's all of us. That's just us being, no, there's no documentation, but the software works, so yeah, I'm going home. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation and responding to change over following a plan. But extreme programming, it sounds a bit chaotic, and we weren't sure how to fit it into Microsoft Project, which did not have an extreme programming plugin. And so instead, we went for Scrum, which is another word for Agile, and it's very much like extreme programming, except, well, it does kind of prioritize processes and tools over individuals and interactions. There's quite a lot of documentation. Customer collaboration. I mean, ideally it would be nice, but who's got the time? So, you know. And yes, responding to change over following a plan, there's no value in that. Make the plan for the next 2 weeks, execute the plan, make excuses why the plan failed, try again. But yes, this is the Scrum chart where you define your product backlog, and then you pull things from the product backlog into a sprint backlog, and then you start the sprint and you put 4 developers and the Scrum Master and the product owner in a washing machine and turn it on for 2 weeks. And once every time round the washing machine, they have a daily meeting, and then you have a definition of done, which is an empty box. Nice and easy to achieve, and then you review that sprint, and then you do it all over again. Now, this seemed a little bit simple for Initro's requirements. We are a medium enterprise aiming to become a large enterprise, and so we needed a more solid and structured form of Scrum. And so we went with the safe, scaled, agile framework. somebody came up to me during the conference, and I think it was after I'd done the simple talk, and they went, we actually use the scaled agile framework. And I'm not a hugging person, but I was kind of looking around to see if any of my more tactile friends were just to hold them. So yes, if you know anyone who is using the scaled agile framework at work and you are a tactile person, hug them for me. Tell them I said it was okay. Also, I don't understand consent, apparently. There it is. One stupid thing comes out of my mouth every talk. So yes, but the best thing about Scrum, or the Scaled Agile Framework version of Scrum, is the meetings. This is why we did Scrum, because you have the backlog ideation meeting, the backlog grooming meeting, the sprint planning meeting, the daily stand-ups, which last an hour and a half because we're sitting down at a Zoom or a Teams or whatever. And then you have the retrospective, and you have the mid-sprint all-hands status update, just because people are kind of like going, oh, it's been a whole week and we haven't heard what you've been doing, mainly having meetings. But yes. And the mandatory brown bag lunch meetings where people share things they've learned, probably in other meetings. And the one-to-ones, so that everyone can let the Scrum Master know how they think they're doing, and the Scrum Master can tell them they're wrong, they're shit, and they're going to get fired. And the free weekly therapy sessions for the programmers who, for some reason, had taken to throwing themselves off the roof of the building. But then, the other thing that happened in 2009 was the cloud. It was definitely 2009. That's when Microsoft Azure launched, and that was the first cloud. Okay? Yes. Sponsored by AWS. And so this whole thing we'd been doing, where we had to raise a purchase order and a truck would come with a large crate full of metal and bring it into the office, and we would plug it in and turn it on. That was the old way of doing things. We wanted the new way of doing things. And so we looked at Azure and Oracle and Amazon Web Services and IBM Cloud. And we decided that we would go with Microsoft Azure, but we wanted to be able to move to any of the other cloud platforms at any time. This is the future-proof idea again. And so before we started work on any of the actual business logic software, we created a complete set of abstractions over all the platform services that we would be using, the compute services, the Azure storage services. We created an abstraction over Azure Blob Storage that would also work over Amazon S3 or Google's big stuff, whatever it's called. And this, I would recommend anybody looking to adopt the cloud do this, because it is very, very important. You cannot spend too much time trying to avoid vendor lock-in. Don't ever, never do that, okay? It will take you 1/10 of the time to migrate a few lines of blob storage or Cosmos DB or whatever to the alternative, if you actually do decide you're going to move to a different cloud. And quite a lot of the time, here's a secret that a lot of people don't know, Amazon, if you're on Azure, Amazon will give you the money to pay the programmers to make the changes so that you can lift your software and start running it on AWS, okay? Won't even cost you anything. And they've got people that they work with regularly. I do it for them sometimes. And I do it the other way around as well, because I'm a tart. The logistics department was starting to get a bit antsy by this point, I will admit. Their spreadsheet had become slightly complicated to the point where once a week they needed to print it off and draw on it with felt-tip pens. But we were confident that we were very nearly at the point of delivering this this final tool. So, our rich internet application built on the completely future-proof Microsoft Silverlight. 6 years, rest in peace. But this was not a problem, because we had discovered that Microsoft Silverlight, whilst it worked on desktop PCs and it worked on laptops, it would not work on iPads and iPhones. And this was entirely the fault of Steve Jobs, who refused to allow the development of browser plugins. And so we had to look for a new way of creating the front ends for these applications. And so we had a meeting and we talked about JavaScript and HTML5 and all these new technologies. But we discovered that there was, just in 2014, released a new programming language. It had been launched at a conference in Lithuania, and this one programming language supported low-level systems and GUIs and mobile phones and voice assistants, which hadn't even been invented yet, and Furbies. And so we decided this was the language, and it was so cutting edge that it hadn't even been implemented yet. This works really well if you've seen most of my other talks. This is BS, which is the worst programming language ever. And if you haven't seen that one, Google it. There's a good copy of it from NDC Oslo in 2021. But yes, so this, I'm trying to do this, basically. It's an extended universe. It's all going to start linking together. And then after 23 of them, I die. Spoilers. And so we had to implement BS, which it turned out had been designed specifically to run as slowly and inefficiently as possible. And so where we had previously been running on a few small servers in the Azure cloud, we had to build a large data center with IBM supercomputers. So the joke was on us. Finally, we get to 2019. The BS version of the system is ready to start testing. But then we get the new age of microservices, micro front ends, micro teams. And this is the most future-proof way of building anything. Because if any one thing becomes obsolete, it's a micro thing, and you only need to replace that one micro thing, and then everything else continues to work around it. And of course, microservices and micro front ends and micro teams require micromanaging. And this was an opportunity for me and my fellow junior vice presidents in charge of slightly fewer of those software peoples were able to actually dive in, roll our sleeves up, and start writing nasty comments about people in pull requests. So yes, new paradigm, new approach, with all this new way of working and the cloud and huge supercomputers bouncing microservices and everything around the place. You needed a new way of handling infrastructure and everything else. And so we discovered DevOps. That's not a typo. And DevOps means empowering your developers so that instead of having to pay people to manage your infrastructure and create your servers and everything else, you just tell the developers that's their job as well. You lay off all those people over there, and the developers just start working 12 hours a day trying to understand why anybody would have released YAML into the wild. Sorry, that should have been glasses off. So we created a DevOps department. We took a bunch of the developers off the other projects and we moved them into the DevOps department. And so if any of the developers on the regular project wanted something deploying, all they had to do was go to the DevOps department and speak to the developers in there who would write a script to do that deployment and then run it for them. And that was definitely better than the old ops department because reasons. And we tried various approaches because containerization is the new way to deploy your code. And as I understand it, it works on your machine. And so you wrap your machine in bubble wrap and send it to the cloud. And then they turn, that was how somebody explained it to me once. And so you could do this with Mesosphere, or you could do it with Docker Swarm, or you could do it with Docker Swarm, because there were two Docker Swarms. They were both called, there was no differentiation in the name at all. And one of them was this big unwieldy behemoth that ran in kind of like data centers and everything. And the other was essentially Docker Compose. And the script that you used to do the orchestration was completely different across both of them. And then Docker wondered why their lunch got eaten by Kubernetes. Kubernetes is the operating system for the cloud. And so we adopted Kubernetes. And then we had just about converted everything over to Kubernetes and created all the YAML files and Helm charts. And then AWS invented serverless computing with AWS Lambda, and Microsoft invented it again with Azure Functions. And then this became the way that we had to deploy applications. But the problem is the vendor lock-in. The vendor lock-in was the real problem. And so we discovered that the best way of doing this is serverless but on Kubernetes with Knative. That is definitely better than just Kubernetes. I know that because somebody from Google told me. And we knew that this approach was working well because at the start of January 2021, we had a mere 3 GitHub repositories. And that went steadily up until March of 2022. And then we had a skyrocketing approach as the people working on the individual services within the organization found ways to break those up into more and more microservices. And so by the end of 2022, we had 214 GitHub repos. And according to the Mac Plus model of microservice maturity, this meant we were at level 3. But then Martin Fowler said, no, you must refactor everything back into a modular monolith. And so it only took us 18 months, but we collapsed all those 214 GitHub repos back into one GitHub repo with a single Visual Studio solution and 847 projects. And it was no longer possible to open Visual Studio and start coding on the same day. And here we are now in 2024. And if there's one thing I regret from the last 30 years, it's that I won't be here to see you launch this amazing project that we have spent so much time building and rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding together. But I feel confident that I am leaving you in very capable hands with Susan, who will continue my mission of innovation and ideation and future-proof technology into the future. I'm Susan now. I'm not going to do the voice. Thank you, Steve, and I wish you the very best with your retirement, and please do give our best to your wife. So yes, as Steve said, we are going to be trying to keep our product future-proof and up with the latest technology, and I have decided that we are going to go all in on AI, and we are going to find ways to integrate the OpenAI ChatGPT protocols into our product, and we're talking to Google about DeepMind for AI-optimized routes for delivery drivers. They assure us that this is an NP-complete problem that can be solved by a sufficiently advanced AI. And we're going to have chatbots for customer support queries and be legally bound by the things those chatbots say on our website, because nothing could possibly go wrong with that. And we're going to have automated meeting minutes. Janice, you're fired. So that we no longer have to have the post-meeting meeting where other people can be told what was decided in the meeting, because the AI will just be able to summarize the meeting to everybody. You guys are also fired. So we will be having one last meeting to discuss this rollout of AI and how it affects your jobs. But I will say now that 2/3 of you are fired. And I haven't told them this yet, but the warehouse, most of the people in the warehouse will also be fired. But for those of you who make it through this essential downsizing as we stride forward into this AI future, I welcome you and I look forward to working closely with you. The logistics department spreadsheet becomes self-aware at 2:14 a.m. Eastern Time, August 29th. In a panic, they try to pull the plug. The spreadsheet fights back.
It delivers 12 million freeze-dried stuffed olives to targets in Russia. It knows that the Russian counter-delivery will destroy its enemies here.
Thank you very much, NDC. I'll see you next year. Bye.